I've spent the last 10 years making a film about mass demonstrations across the country against the current administration, that it's about a White House in disarray, obsessed with leaks. It's about a president certain the media is making up stories, lying. It's about huge, big document drops of classified material into the public sphere that destabilizes our understanding of events, stolen material. It's about an asymmetrical warfare that even the Mighty Mite of the United States Army is having military is having a hard time figuring out how you handle it. It's accusations that a political campaign reached out to a foreign power at the time of a national election to influence that election. I think we knew that we were diving into some pretty rough territory, but we also knew that people have just sort of ignored Vietnam, that the conventional wisdom that I had, the baggage that I brought to it, needed to be shed right away, and that we could take advantage of 42 years of scholarship into almost every aspect of the war. And we engaged more than 24 scholars and also veterans who have pretty, intensely refined BS meters to help us get it right over the years, and not just come in once and say good, but having an evolving script. And so we knew it would take about a dozen years, and that we were really dedicated to that. We love that. It's not something you get bored with. People say, how do you, maintain your interest? The problem is leaving it. When it's done, it's horrific. It's like sending your kid off to college. You'll have a relationship, but things are really, really different now. So part of what I like is this period where I get to go out and travel around the country and sort of talk about it, show clips from the film, and have the opportunity to engage in conversations all across the country about the issues of Vietnam. If I had decided to do this series to come out in 1985, 10 years after the fall of Saigon, the United States was in a recession. People were talking about Japan being the new superpower, that the balance of power in the world had shifted from one side of the Pacific Rim to the other, that Vietnam would be this ball and chain that we would forever drag behind us. If I'd waited till 1995, when we were the sole superpower, we were in the middle of the largest peacetime expansion in our nation's history, that we had just won the first Gulf War with one arm tied behind our back with a coalition of many, many of the willing, you'd say Vietnam was important, but it wouldn't have the centrality signifying the decline of the United States. If I'd waited until 2005, 30 years afterwards, when we're bogged down in Iraq and Afghanistan, we're after 9/11, you'd say people are beginning to say about those wars, they're a lot like Vietnam, the quagmires. So what you begin to understand is that when you can get 40 years out, it's not so much where we are now, but you can liberate yourself from the potential tyranny, or that's too strong a word, the myopia of that particular view, and see something cleaner. It isn't from this mountaintop. It isn't from this 14,000-foot peak. It isn't from this one. It's actually a variety of positions, and that's liberating. Hugely liberating to be able to tell a story and at the same time say, look, particularly in war, there's not just one truth. And this was not, the same as the Civil War and the World War II, but in many ways very much the same. You can go back and there's very difficult images to look at the Civil War, still photographs, and very, very difficult still photographs and footage from World War II. Vietnam is a different time. It's in many of our lifetime. There's a kind of up-tempo. It takes place mostly in the 1960s, which produces an extraordinary body of music that can be our soundtrack. There is color. There are photographs that still represent to us the DNA. When we want to say something important, we stop and do it in still photographs. And yet there's many iconic images from that war that bubble up to the surface that are just sort of part of our superficial understanding of it, that needed to be sort of treated in a very serious, in-depth fashion, whether it's a young girl napalmed over more than 30% of her body running down a road naked because her own Air Force, the South Vietnamese Air Force, has mistakenly bombed them, thinking that they were retreating enemy and not villagers. Or it's the assassination of a North Vietnamese spy in the heat and battle and moment of the Tet Offensive on the streets of Saigon by the head of the National Peace, a man named Luan. or the woman hutched over her comrade dead at Kent State in Ohio in May of 1970. These images become sort of superficialized, and we're trying to return to them their dimension. If a picture is worth 1,000 words, we want to return full value to those things.
Something was happening that was profound, that was irreversible.
What was it all about? Was it worth it?
Smart people in pinstripes could make their minds up about the war.
It was extremely traumatic, like the ground was suddenly cut from under you.
We just tried to believe that this was the right thing to do.
I came into this thinking that this was something I lived through. I grew up in Ann Arbor, Michigan, a hotbed of opposition to the war. I thought I knew what had happened. I grew up way too early because of Vietnam and other things, Kennedy assassination, Cuban Missile Crisis. I watched the news, I read the paper. I thought I knew, and then I came into this project and knew I had to let go of whatever baggage, points of view that I might have had, but I didn't realize that how instantly I'd know how little I knew. And that kind of humiliation was a wonderful, daily humiliation was a wonderful thing. And so yes, we want to be able to sort of share with you what happened, but do it in a way that represents not the totality, but as many different perspectives as we possibly can, and not have our thumb on the scale, not have an agenda or an axe to grind, and be umpires calling balls and strikes.